say I have a plethora of piñatas?
Oh, at one point in time, we thought we were going to have a plethora of sacks. This is Tim Steer, Chang Straight Talk, powered by Online Big Blue LLC. Want to talk about the Sack Twins, who are now the Ghost Brothers, because it's now going into week 3, and neither one of them has a sack. How did things go so wrong so quickly for this dynamic duo, for Batman and Robin? We all thought that Kayvon Thibodeaux was going to be, that Brian Burns, I should say, was going to bring out the best in Kayvon Thibodeaux. That Kayvon Thibodeaux was going to bring out the best in Brian Burns. But instead, we now have the new sound effects, the Ghost Brothers.
Submitted for your approval. The Ghost Brothers. Nobody needs to be afraid.
Truly, right now, no one's afraid of the Ghost Brothers because attacking the Giant defense is extremely easy to figure out. You just run off tackle directly at Kayvon Thibodeaux and Brian Burns because neither of them play the run extremely well. And doing so, you're getting huge chunks of yards, just as Brian Robinson Jr., and you are taking away from the New York Giants the strength of what they perceived to be when they made this trade, which is going to be the pass rush. Now, blame can fall on many places, and blame takes on many faces. You can blame Shane Bowen. Well, first you have to let's get all the blame out of the way. First, you have to blame the general manager, Joe Schoen. Brian Burns, good player, yes. Great player in Carolina, no. Because of the fact that he was mostly on bad teams. And I've said this a million times before. I'm not taking away anything from his talent, but on bad teams, still someone has to make the play. And I always go back to beginning of the season before the trade with the rankings. Carolina was ranked 32nd. Giants were ranked 31st. Giants make the trade. And a couple weeks later, the rankings come out. Carolina is still 32nd. Now, we took the best player off the Carolina Panthers, this premier pass rusher. You'd think we would have gone up a little bit in the rankings. No, we were still 31st. Didn't really move the needle. I go back to listening to the NFL Network on the radio on Sirius, and I laugh, though, because after we signed him for Burns to $120 million, the first thing that came out of one of the announcers' mouths was, you know what? Giants did good to get him for a good, fair price. Problem is they gave $120 million to an 8-sack guy. You're looking at a kid that's 26 years old, and Burns probably is going to be approaching 30 when hopefully the Giants are good again. So is he really going to be a core piece down the road for this team? Probably not. Kayvon Thibodeaux is already in year 3. You're going to have to figure out what you're going to do in year 4 with that 5th-year option. They may only be together for a couple of years before either Thibodeaux is not, the 5th-year option is not picked up, or Brian Burns is just traded or moved on for assets. So you gave away some of your draft assets in a draft that we could have used that additional second-round pick to take a quarterback. Because Joe, I'm just going to let you know this. It's not against the law to take a quarterback. You've been here 3 years. You've been here for 3 drafts. And you said to Ryan Poles, I guess you're glad you don't have to scout quarterbacks. So, the problem is if you keep scouting quarterbacks and you never take one, you're never going to have a quarterback. I'm just throwing that out there. So the blame has to start with the general manager. We talked about this a million times before. Hard Knocks was the worst window into the Giants ever. Before free agency, there was the scene where Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen are sitting in the office, and Joe Schoen looks at Brian Daboll and says, hey, listen, if you could have one guy in free agency, not a player, just a position, what would it be? Brian Burns, offensive lineman. I rephrase that. Brian Daboll, offensive lineman. And we all know what Joe Schoen said. What about Brian Burns? And then Shane Bowen's first defensive meeting in the building with the entire staff and Joe Schoen. Joe Schoen looks at him and says, what do you need to make your defense successful? Shane Bowen says 2 linebackers. And Joe Schoen, of course, what about Brian Burns? You already had it in your mind. You were training for Brian Burns. Dan Morgan is one of your best friends, so you already knew you were going to make this trade. You were just trying to get people along with it, but your coach wants an offensive lineman and your defense coordinator wants 2 linebackers. So the thought process is, okay, the first person to blame for this whole fiasco is Joe Shane, because if you also looked at the body of work from Brian Burns, he is Kayvon Thibodeaux-esque. There are extended periods of time where, and we went through this, and we're not going to go through it again ad nauseum. There were plenty of times, if you go back and look at Brian Burns' seasons, even in his best season 2 years ago, he would have no sacks in one game. He would have no solo tackles in a game. We did it last year before the trade. We broke down every one of his games, and you saw multitudes of games where he had 0 or 1 tackle. And then we also saw multitudes of games where he went an extended period of time without sacks. It's Kayvon Thibodeaux. Kayvon Thibodeaux always for the last 2 years, now going on 3, Kayvon Thibodeaux disappears. He'll come up in chunks. He'll come up like 7-Up. And you turn around and you could see that, he'll have 7 sacks in 3 games, and then he'll have 4.5 for the rest of the season. Then he'll go 6.5 games or 6 games with only a half a sack. Kayvon Thibodeaux, that is. Brian Burns does the exact same thing. And one of the things I said over and over again, what is going to happen to this fan base when both of these guys disappear at the same time? Because we knew it was going to happen. You knew they were both going to have games where they both didn't get any tackles. They didn't get any sacks. They got nothing. We knew it was going to happen. The looking back at that body of work and the history for both players, you knew what was going to happen sooner or later, but I didn't think it would happen the first 2 weeks of the season. What's going to happen is one of them's going to get a sack, and it's going to be like it's the greatest sack in the history of the world. They're going to dance like it's the greatest thing ever. I always say, be like Barry Sanders, be like Marvin Harrison, act like you've been there. Don't be Mark Gastineau. So there's plenty of blame, again, for Joe Shane misreading the market in reference to Brian Burns, and misreading the value and how he fits on this team. I can't blame Shane Bowen for how Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeaux both fit on the team. You have a guy that likes to rush 4. He only blitzes 25% of the time, going back to his body of work in Tennessee. Both of these guys would have fit better in the attacking style defensive wing, not in Shane Bowen, because he also likes to drop his ends into coverage. And the problem is, if you don't have those quality linebackers backing these guys up, you're going to have someone like Brian Robinson Jr. rip this team for 120 plus yards on 17 carries. You're going to have the likes of Aaron Jones ripping this team for 90 something yards on like 15 carries. This is going to continue. This is going to be a theme all season long. And it doesn't help that the Wonder Twins, they both just kind of disappear.
Hey kids, look over there. Who is it? It's Kayvon, the friendly pass rusher. Oh no, now he's gone.
And once again, I got to give all the credit in the world to James Williams. James Williams, a year and a half ago, dubbed Kayvon Thibodeaux Casper, the friendly pass rusher. Now I see a lot of people saying that he's a ghost, that he's like Casper. Well, give all the credit in the world to James Williams and the people that follow this channel, because we knew it from the beginning. I'm not saying that neither one of these guys are talented. I'm just saying that their body of work and their history shows the fact that they will disappear for extended periods of times. And I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say it over and over again. That was my biggest concern, that they were both going to disappear at once. So now we're sitting there going into week 3.
I gotta come up with something. The old line thinks I'm nothing if I only had a sack.
Still waiting for a sack. Still waiting for the Giants first to win. Still waiting for a sack. We have to see what happens in regards to Cleveland. Blame number 2. You got to go with the players. You have to go with the guys that we had all this boisterous talk. They were practicing their sack dances. They were hanging out together ad nauseum during the offseason. And I've said this before. And I've said this with Kayvon Thibodeaux when he came in here and said, well, I'm going to get 17 sacks. I'm going to sack a game. Well, 16 sacks back then. I'm going to sack a game. And I've said it before. You can have that boisterous talk. You can toot your own horn. And we said it a million times. It's Kid Rock. They say I'm cocky. I say, what? Ain't bragging, motherfucker, if you back it up. But if you don't back it up, you just kind of come off like an asshole. And then Kayvon was truculent last year, the first couple games of the season, because he didn't have any sacks. Then he went through a period of time where he played well and he was friend to the media again. Then he goes 6 games with only half a sacks. And then all of a sudden the fan base and everyone's an asshole but him. I'm not saying Brian Burns has done that. I actually felt bad for Brian Burns, who literally sat at his locker for an extended period of time, still in his uniform after the loss. I will tell you something from experience. I've experienced some bad losses before. And when you're sitting there in your uniform like an hour and a half after the game in full pads, you really felt the loss and you really felt you didn't do enough. So I'm not blaming Brian Burns for not trying. I'm just saying you can't talk the talk if you're not going to walk the walk. This will all change, of course, if one of them gets a sack. But it's still, you have to put some onus on the players. They have to do their job. They have to be better. You know what would be an easy way to fix this? Start playing the run better. Start maintaining your assignment. Start holding the edge. Start pushing the play back into the middle of the field to proverbially the strength of the line, which is Dexter Lawrence. Do some crazy shit like that. And you know what happened? Then you can go after the quarterback, because when you get over aggressive and you go after the quarterback, all the quarterback's going to do is step up in the pocket and run. We are lucky we played the likes of Jaden Daniels and Sam Darnold. Now we got Deshaun Watson. 3 I would refer to as quarterbacks that were not that awesome. Once we run into a real quarterback, we are in a lot of trouble. But thank God, not even thank God, because we're 0-2. But you've already lost to Darnold and Daniels in a second start, and you could potentially lose to Deshaun Watson, who hasn't had a good year in 2 years. He's had better time in the massage room.
That's what she said.
Or maybe that's not what she said. But so you got to blame the players. Blame number 3 has got to go the defensive coordinator either way. Because of the fact that you in week 1 decided that I'm going to drop Burns in the coverage, because that's not what he's good at. Shane Bowen has not really adjusted to his talent. Sometimes you can't play your own system. That's the problem with Wink, especially Wink's last year in Baltimore. He tried to play the system that made him successful for 4.5, 5 years, but then when you don't have the players, you can't play that system. The Shane Bowen system, you need quality linebackers. You need good safety play. And you need to generate your rush with your 4 guys. But if these things aren't happening and teams are just running the ball 35 times because they're not afraid of your ends, you got to do something different. You got to switch it up a little bit. And to still give up 5 field goals to Washington, people are going to say, well, he stopped them from scoring touchdowns. Well, I hate to break this news to you. If you score field goals, that's still points in the red zone. So you got to blame Shane as well. I mean, Shane Bowen. I was always thinking Joe Shane. You got to blame him as well. And some of the blame has got to also fall on your head coach. He had no problem getting in Wink's face in the Dallas game, but I don't see him getting Shane's face. I think Brian Daboll is just trying to get fired. I'm not saying the Kayvon, Thibodeaux, Brian Burns tandem is not going to still have, awesomeness written all over. I'm not saying it, but I'm just saying this. We've always worried that they are carbon copy players. They look exactly the same and they play exactly the same. And the problem is, if you do that and you disappear at the same time, you take away the strength of this defense. You know what? Phillips had a great game. Phillips had a great game tackle-wise. But like I tell everyone else, if you make the tackles after the completion, you're not doing your job, which is to break up the pass. I ask everyone again, it's like Aaron Robinson back in training camp 2 years ago. Aaron Robinson in that preseason game was making all the tackles, but he was also allowing all the completions. I asked the same question. What was Phillips' QBR? What was the QBR against Phillips? That's all I asked. Just look that up. I still think, like I said, this can work. I still think that they need to modify their defensive game plan. And we're going to talk about this during the week. I'm tired of talking about the opposing teams because everything that I've said, and I love people because they're on Twitter and in the chat section are like, Tim, everything you said has come true. And again, like I said, it's not like I'm omnipotent. It's just easy to see these are the deficiencies of the Giants. And if I can see it, you think an astute NFL defense or offensive coordinator or head coach isn't going to see it also? Oh, it's easy. But I think they just need to change up their game plan a little bit. That's all I'm going to say. I got a bone to pick with Mark Schlereth, whatever the fuck his name is. He stole my red stripe line. I did a video 3 years ago after the Rams game. Zach Attack posted it for me. It was 3 years ago, and the video was titled, New York Giants Daniel Jones is now the king of the red stripe, and not in a good way. It's Daniel Jones, Captain Red Stripe Man. So now I understand that I wasn't listening to the game because I had the Green Bay game on and I had the Giant game on as well. So evidently he was talking about how he was red striping Daniel Jones, and evidently they had some kind of I guess some kind of graphic on it. I don't know. The video was from it was actually 3 years ago. It doesn't have a date on it. I found it. You know what? I'll post the video. Oh, it's October 5th, 2020. And I've said it before. Schlereth, I'm looking for you. Stop stealing my shit. If I see you, I'm going to punch you in the back of the head. And of course, I'm just joking. But he did steal. I don't think he stole it from me, but I did say back on October 5th, 2020, that Daniel Jones is. It's Daniel Jones, Captain Red Stripe Man. He's going to get Neighbors killed. 18 targets for 10 receptions, and people still want to blame him for the drop, that fourth down drop. And you know what's crazy? And I said this before. Bill Parcells said years ago, and like I said, I'm a little bit of a student of the game, a little bit of history of the game. He said years ago that you don't lose a game on one play. There are 5 or 6 other plays throughout the game that leads you to that one play that costs you the game. You don't have those 5 or 6 plays, you don't get to that last play. So don't blame Neighbors for the fourth down drop, because he did throw it out of bounds and he did throw it to him as he was falling down. It was not good ball placement. So don't blame Neighbors for that. But if you don't think they're going to have safety help on Neighbors now? You don't think we're going to double team Neighbors now? You don't think they're going to tell Daniel Jones, we're going to cut this side of the field off? You're going to have to go someplace else. And if he keeps throwing him into contact, the kid's not going to survive the season. That's all I'm going to say about that. Oh, we're going to have a lot of videos this week, so make sure you stay tuned. We're also going to do a live stream and have a couple guests on. We're going to do some live streams. Before the Dallas game, we're working on a special live stream show after the Thursday night Dallas game, so make sure you stay tuned for that. And as always, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to ring that bell because you want to know why. That'd be awesome.